Welcome to Mr. B's Auto Shop. Today we are going to be covering a leak down test. In the last lesson we learned how to do a compression test. The compression test identifies which cylinder has a problem but does not identify the problem. This test will pinpoint the exact problem or the area of the problem that's causing low compression. When we do a compression test, it's important that we have all the spark plugs removed during the test. However, when we do a leak down test, we only want to remove the one spark plug of the cylinder we're testing. So we're going to go ahead and reinstall the other three plugs. Don't forget, anytime you install a spark plug in an aluminum head, to always use a small amount of anti-seize to prevent the spark plug from binding in the threads. And we're going to go ahead and install 3 spark plugs. Leave the one out on the cylinder that you want to test. If you have to test more than one cylinder, then you'll test the one cylinder, then put the spark plug back in that one and remove the spark plug from the other cylinder that you want to test. Do not be tempted to use air tools when you are reinstalling your spark plugs, as they are made of porcelain. So if you try to install them incorrectly, you can break the spark plug, or you will end up damaging the threads on the cylinder head, and then that will cost you a lot of money. So we're going to go ahead and install the other 2. The reason we want to do a leak down test is just because you have low compression in a cylinder doesn't mean you need to rebuild the engine. The problem may be in the lower end or the block, or the problem may be in the cylinder head. If the problem is the rings, then of course we would have no choice but to rebuild the motor. If the problem is in the cylinder head, then we can just remove the cylinder head, replace the head gasket and service the valves, and then that will take care of the problem. Alright, so we now have them in there. We're going to go ahead and tighten them down. When we do a leak down test, the cylinder that we're testing needs to be at TDC, which stands for top dead center. This is the highest point in the piston's movement. We can use a wooden dowel, or in this case I'm going to use a 1/4 inch extension. I'm going to set it down through the spark plug hole so it sits on top of the piston. Then I'm going to go to the harmonic balancer, the crankshaft pulley, and I'm going to rotate the pulley until this spark plug or this piston comes to very top dead center. We're going to go ahead and rotate it. Watch the extension as I rotate it, and you'll see it come up and then pause. Stop as soon as it pauses. If we go too far, we've passed top dead center, and then later on when we install air into the cylinder, it's going to cause the crankshaft to rotate, and then that's going to give us a faulty reading, and well, if your hands are in the wrong spot, it can hurt you. Once you've rotated it, make sure that you remove the socket from the crankshaft pulley so that if it does spin, the ratchet doesn't spin around and hit anything. So you'll notice that the cylinder is at top dead center. So I am then going to remove my gauge, and we are going to use a leak down tester. This one happens to be made by Snap-on, but they're all pretty much the same. Inside of the box we have an adapter. This adapter looks similar to the one that we used for the compression test. However, if you notice, this one does not have a Schrader valve in it to allow the air to pass into the cylinder. If it has a Schrader valve, then you'll get a faulty good reading and you'll never find the problem. So if there is one, go ahead and remove it so that the space is empty. We are going to compare the adapter to the spark plug. And you will notice that the spark plug is much longer than the current adapter. So we're going to place another adapter on it that matches this thread. Make sure you thread this one on snugly. If you do not, when you go to remove it, only this part's gonna come out. This is gonna remain stuck in there, and well, they're kind of hard to get out after that point. Next, we're going to thread this in hand tight. We're now going to grab the gauge. The gauge actually has two sections in it. The first section gives us the PSI of the air coming in through this valve. And the second section gives us our reading, whether we're losing an acceptable amount of air, a moderate amount, or a really serious issue. We want to make sure that the cylinder is on top dead center of the compression stroke, so both valves are open. If it's at top dead center and it is on the end of the power and beginning of the intake stroke, then the intake valve will be open and you'll get a bad reading even if there is no problem. We are going to attach an air line to the end of the tool, pull back the coupler, put it on. It gives us our air pressure. Next, if we look on this gauge, we have to zero this gauge. Over here is my zeroing knob. If I pull down on it and then rotate it, you can see how it moves the needle. And I want to put the needle on the zero line. Once I have it zeroed, go ahead and close the adjustment so it doesn't adjust on its own. And then I'm going to install the air line off the gauge onto the cylinder. You'll notice that this cylinder reads beyond the good area, so there is no leakage at all in this cylinder. This cylinder would be considered acceptable. If it's in the moderate range, then we're gonna have to look for the issue. And of course, if it's in the red area, we definitely need to find the problem. So that would be how we would test one cylinder. When we are done, go ahead and disconnect the air line. Set your gauge off to the side. Remove your adapter. Then reinstall the spark plug. Don't forget the anti-seize. And then we will test another cylinder. Test is really quick and easy. Once we find a cylinder that has an issue, then we will be able to search for the problem. So the next cylinder we're gonna do, I actually have, so one of the valves is open so that you can see what the gauge will read like when there's a problem. Unfortunately, right now, I don't have a car in the shop that has an engine issue. So we're now gonna remove the number 1 spark plug. We are going to reinstall the adapter. Now 1 and 4 are on the same position as far as the piston. So if 1's on top or 4's on top dead center, then 1's on top dead center as well. And then 2 and 3 would be on bottom dead center. Now because this one is on the beginning of the intake and the power stroke, the intake valve would be open. So we're gonna get a bad reading. So I'm gonna go ahead and hook up the gauge. And if you notice, the gauge is reading in the red. So that means that there is a significant leak. At this point, we have to identify where is the problem. The first thing we want to do is take our hand and feel on the cylinders next to it. If it's one of these cylinders, then you're going to check both or the ones on each side. If air is coming out, then you have a blown head gasket between these two cylinders. The head will need to be removed, resurfaced, and then the head gasket replaced. If we don't find the issue, then go ahead and remove the oil fill cap. You are then going to put your hand over that. If you feel air coming out, then you have faulty rings or a problem with the piston. That requires the engine to be removed, taken apart, and then determine where the issue is, and most likely be rebuilt. If you still haven't found the problem, we then will move to the radiator. We're going to remove the radiator cap, and we are going to look and see if there's any air coming out or any bubbles. If you have air or bubbles coming out of the radiator cap or the radiator itself, this would indicate a blown head gasket or a cracked cylinder head. We'd remove the head, inspect it, and then do the correct repair, but you will not have to remove the engine. If you still haven't found it, we then are going to remove the air intake hose and open the throttle, and then do the same thing and listen and feel for air coming out of the throttle. If you feel air coming out of the throttle, this indicates the intake valve is not sealing. You could have a broken valve spring, you could have a bad valve, and once again we'd have to remove the cylinder head and then inspect and repair from there. If you still haven't found the problem, then you'll go to the exhaust of the car, and at the exhaust you will feel for air or listen for air coming out. If you find air coming out of the exhaust, then your exhaust valve is not sealing. Once again, this could be a bad valve spring, or it could be a valve that's just not seating properly. We need to remove the cylinder head and inspect and then make the proper repair. So by doing this test, if you get a reading that's in the yellow or the red range, we can very easily remove the spark plug, test that cylinder, just make sure it's at top dead center, and then identify the last location of the fault and make the correct repair without guessing. This can save you a substantial amount of money if the problem's in the cylinder head, or if it does need an engine, it can save you from spending a lot of money on a car that you really don't think you want to keep. So this concludes the leak down test lesson. At this point we will reassemble the car and test it to make sure it is in good running condition. And that's all we have. Thank you for watching Mr. B's Auto Shop, and I'll see you next time.